Hi everyone, this is Artie from Human Chapters. I'll tell you a little bit about Human Chapters. Humans are living narratives with the past, present, and future. These narratives constitute of a number of chapters across the lifespan. The aim of these conversations is to highlight a chapter of the narrative and unpack its connections to other chapters. I don't care whether people are natural storytellers, but I truly do believe each one of us has a worthy story to share. Acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which now comprises Greater Shepparton. We pay respect to their tribal elders, past and present and emerging. We celebrate their continuing culture and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. And today we are talking to Jim. Jim is from Shepparton and we are going to be talking about GB Foodshare as part of Jim's chapter. And I'll pass it on to Jim to introduce himself. Go for it, Jim.
Hi, my name's Jim O'Connor. I wasn't born in Shepparton, but I've lived in Shepparton for a lot of my life, but I've also lived in 12 other towns so far, mainly in Eastern Victoria. So I know Eastern Victoria, country Eastern Victoria very well, including having spent 12 years in East Gippsland. But at that time I was working right across Gippsland from Warragul right through to remote places like Bendock and Bonang and Orbost. So in those days, I was working in the courts as a clerk of courts or a court registrar, is what they're called nowadays. And part of that was running a charity called the Court Poor Box, that's now called the Court Fund. And it was a form of emergency relief for people. So I think that's why I'm here today to talk about my role in Foodshare and how I came to be involved in Foodshare. Is that right, Artie?
Yes, it is. Yes. So Jim, yeah, take us through your journey from when you started. I would love to hear about when you started the charity court fund, and why you started it, and then how it sort of led through to Foodshare.
Yes, well, I didn't start the court fund. I think the court poor box was probably started, 150 years ago when the courts first came into Victoria, when Victoria separated from New South Wales. So it's a fairly old institution, but I guess by mentioning the court fund or the poor box, I'm talking about my first introduction to emergency relief and food relief, because most of the places that I worked at was the only one of the only forms of emergency relief was the court poor box or the court fund. And as a result of being involved with distribution of money from that, I came to understand how emergency relief occurred in the towns in which I worked, and it was pretty ad hoc, to be frank. The organisations that distributed emergency relief didn't talk to each other, and as it turned out, the court fund tended to be common ground, because what I used to do was distribute most of the money from the court fund to the local emergency relief organisations like the St Vincent de Paul and Salvation Army and others, so that they could use it generally for food relief for people in dire straits. And anyway, to come to the Shepparton Foodshare after working in the courts for 27 years and then over 17 years as the Chief Executive Officer of a large employment service and social enterprise called Work Trainers, which was based in Shepparton. I was enticed to join the board of Shepparton Foodshare, which had started about, I think it started in about 2010 or 2012. And the meetings that initiated Shepparton Foodshare were held at my premises where I was the CEO in our meeting room, and I was sort of helping them from the sidelines a bit, but not directly involved. So I can't claim credit for starting it up. I was probably more on the sidelines barracking for the and advocating for a food share organisation to be set up. And what the way Shepparton Foodshare works is it's a bit like a wholesaler. It doesn't directly distribute relief to individuals. Shepparton Foodshare has relationships with supermarkets and food factories and fruit and vegetable growers and other producers of food. And we attract donations from those sort of organisations. Often it's either leftover food or food that's otherwise going to go to landfill, or food that's past its best before date. And we're able to get it donated to us for nothing. And we then make that food available to the likes of St Vincent de Paul and the Salvation Army. I know I mentioned those a lot, but there's also a lot of very good church groups who provide food aid. There's a lot of school breakfast programs and lunch programs that Foodshare supplies food to. At last count, there's over 100 organisations that, if you like, they're the retailers. They collect their food from Shepparton Foodshare and they distribute it directly to the people in need. So we're a bit like the person in the middle. But what was happening before Shepparton Foodshare was set up was each of those 100 organisations were making approaches to food factories and supermarkets and fruit and vegetable growers and others asking for donations, and that becomes a drag for those organisations, and a lot of them basically just, rather than being harassed to some extent by small requests for donations, they basically said, no, we don't make donations, and because it was too hard to administer. So by just having one point of contact for their donations to of food, of leftover or waste food, it's made it much easier for them. So we actually have a good relationship with nearly every supermarket and food producer and food factory and vegetable and fruit grower around, and so they only have to deal with us. They don't have to deal with 100 organisations, and so we get the food donated, and we then allow the retailers, if you like, the smaller charities and organisations to come and basically do a shop at our supermarket, if you like to call it that. And the only difference is they don't pay on the way out. They just take what they need and use it for the purposes of feeding people. So it is only food relief that we do, and the model of food share in Shepparton is probably not a lot different to a model in a number of other larger regional centres. I'm aware that Albury-Wodonga has a food share, and Bendigo has a food share, and Warrnambool, and I think some other regional centres are in the process of setting up a food share similar to ours.
Yeah.
So that's how it works, if you like. We're a wholesaler. So if you are a person in desperate need of food relief, you don't actually come to us. You have this normal relationship with the Salvation Army or St Vincent de Paul or the school or whatever.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jim, for explaining that part of the model of food share. And you mentioned, so it started in 2010 in Shepparton?
Yeah, look, I think that's when the talks first began, and it probably started operations about 2012.
2012. Yeah.
Yeah.
How, as it's unfolded, can you tell us a little bit about how it's grown, some of the things that were challenging, some of the positive
Mm.
outcomes, a little bit about that journey from 2012 to today, I suppose?
Well, I wasn't involved until about 4 or 5 years ago, so I wasn't there for half of that journey, except, as I said, barracking from the sidelines, hoping they did well and offering help if they asked for it. But uh, the good thing about Foodshare is it's mainly staffed by volunteers. So there's about 20 volunteers who work with Foodshare all the time, probably quite a few other people that come and go, but 20 core volunteers. And effectively, until recently, it's had one EFT paid staff member. That, when I say one EFT, that comprises of a coordinator 4 days a week and two other people half a day a week. So it works out at one full-time person. So it's a very cost efficient model because most of the labour and the work of sorting and picking up and distributing is done by volunteers. Most of those volunteers are older people who've left the workforce, and that's created certain problems with the advent of COVID because they're the older people are the ones most at risk of catching COVID, and also they don't necessarily have a lot of stamina. So if the demand and throughput ramps up, that's made it makes it difficult for them to work harder. But having said that, we've been blessed with a number of extra volunteers during COVID who made themselves available. So that's really helped. But the model, what I like about the model is its efficiency. We get no funding from the government. Until recently, we have had some funding from the government to help us buy supplies during COVID, but that's really um, a very recent event, and I think the government has seen it as the most efficient way to get food relief out to people in need is to fund us to buy in extra food at times like this. So we get no, when I say we get no funding from government, we don't get any ongoing funding from government. Um, we might get some money from them at times when things are a bit desperate
Yeah.
and they want to look good. They'll make some money available to us, so we're happy to take it. But they don't operate us. So the trouble with government giving you money is the government pretty much wants to control your model and your output and your messaging when they give you money. So we're an independent organisation run by a community-based board of and the board of volunteers as well, in effect. So it's they're a good group of people on the board with a diverse range of skills, mainly business. And I can tell you that the boards I've been involved with at Foodshare have all been proud of the fact that we operate a very efficient charity with no government funding, and we generally hit the mark with distributing food to those in need.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about COVID and the impact of COVID on Foodshare since last year, March. How has,
Well,
yeah,
yes. Well, first of all, the model of retail distribution of the smaller charities distributing food aid to people in need was very much affected by COVID because most of those smaller charities are staffed by volunteers, most of whom are retired and in the age group most at risk of getting COVID. So a lot of them lost some lost all of their volunteers and couldn't operate. And so that created a real problem with getting food aid out because when your retailers aren't operating, where do those that get their food
yeah,
from I call it retail in italics, uh, charity. Where do they get their food? So what we had to change our model so that we could get food out, and we started packing food into boxes with the boxes containing what we thought was a credible variety of foodstuffs that would help people in need. So it had a range of staples, fresh fruit and vegetables, and uh, things like milk, bread, pasta, rice, and tin food, uh, things like that. Our best guess, and also based on what we had as well. We because we rely on donations and food, we can only give out what we get. So we were packing it into boxes and arranging for it to be distributed um, via third-party organisations. And so that was the model uh, until COVID hit Shepparton, I guess a few weeks to a month ago, and we started to get um, very large numbers of people in lockdown in Shepparton. Um, sorry, people in quarantine in Shepparton. The whole town or the whole region's in lockdown, but there were something like the best part of 20,000 people were had to stay at home, go out and shop, and the supermarkets couldn't deliver to a large extent because they'd lost a large amount of their staff.
Yeah.
Actually got geared up anyway to deliver such vast amounts of food. So we had to change our model again and seek larger amounts of food from our normal donators, but also the quickest way to get food is to buy it. And a lot of people were contacting us from um, Melbourne and outside the Shepparton region saying, how can we help? And our response was, if you give us money, we can buy what we need and distribute it to those in need. Because there are so many households where people couldn't get out and families are all at home, they're all eating at home, and we're running out of food. So what we organised and we're still running with over the last few weeks is packing 3 boxes of foodstuffs for each household. One box would be fruit and vegetables and perishables.
Yeah.
The next box would be staples like milk and bread and pasta, rice, those sort of things, and tin food. And the third box would be, we actually got a lot of frozen food donated. So we had frozen meals and frozen items. And we had to round up a whole lot of extra volunteers.
Yeah.
In fact, many dozens of volunteers to deliver those to households. And a new organisation was set up, which was actually operated by the Shepparton Lighthouse Project, called GV Cares, and it incorporated Shepparton Foodshare and a number of other credible local organisations, and the Lighthouse Project itself, which has a lot of volunteers to get those food parcels delivered to those in need. And that's what we're busy doing at this very point in time. Actually, absolutely flat out. But we've been getting donations of money and also foodstuffs from all around the region. And I can't believe the generosity of people with money and with product. The Cadbury's and the food processors have been very generous. Donations of UHT milk and canned food from SPC, vegetables from local vegetable growers like Farms at Shepparton East and Kelly Brothers up on the Murray Valley Highway. And look, I shouldn't even mention names because there's so many dozens of generous individuals that have donated that it's almost embarrassing. And the numbers of people that have donated money, and I know some of them are pensioners who don't have a lot of money, and they're donating, $20 a fortnight out of their pension to
Yeah.
Foodshare.
Wow.
So uh, it's become a popular charity of late, which is very pleasing at a time like this, and to see the community come together to make sure that everyone's fed and they might have a lot of problems that have been caused by COVID, but hopefully um, lack of food is not one of them. Um, so that's what's happening with Foodshare at the moment. We're very busy with that project to feed the community, and that will continue until um, some sort of normality is achieved.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking about viewers or people that will potentially be watching this conversation or listening to it on podcasts that are not from Shepparton or across the world somewhere. And just to put a few things into perspective, um, is our town has about approximately 60,000 people in it, and out of
Yeah,
which to a third of them are quarantining and isolating due to the COVID outbreak at the moment as we're speaking. And that's where GV Cares and Foodshare and all of those organizations have merged to, reach out and get emergency relief um, food products to the community to ensure
yeah,
everyone. Yeah.
that's well. That you painted the picture. That is what it is. Shepparton's a regional um, centre with a total population of close to 70,000. But
Yeah.
when you've got most of the people actually do live in Shepparton and Mooroopna, probably in excess of 40,000 um, uh, live in those two towns, which are only 2 kilometres apart. And
Yeah.
there's probably the best part of 20,000 people forced to self-isolate in those towns. So that gives you some sort of scale of the picture. On the plus side, we live in uh, an area that's a massive producer of foodstuffs for Australia and in fact the world. Um, so there is a lot of food here, but as is normally the case when you have a change in circumstances, you have to change the way you do things to be able to make sure that the right aid goes to the right places at the right time, and that's when the difficulty of late able to settle down now uh, as we are dealing with the scale of the problem. Uh, I think the fact that we're a place that produces much more food than it needs has put us in a good position. Of course, that doesn't mean you've got the food that we want or that people need. They can't all live on tinned peaches, for instance, from SPC for
Correct.
weeks on end. Uh, the food shares at Bendigo and other regional centres, we're accredited with those generally because um, we're able. One of the ways that the food shares work together is trade food between each other. So if they've got a lot of eggs and we have eggs and we've got a lot of tinned fruit and they haven't, we swap resources around, and that's been really good. So we've had help from a whole variety of organisations, including other food shares, to allow us to meet the challenge. But probably the biggest challenge is to change the business model,
Mhm.
which is, as I said, we're a wholesaler. We've actually had to become effectively like a retailer and distribute food directly to people in need, which is not the way we were set up in the middle of a pandemic um, with a shortage of volunteers. So it was gearing up to do all that has been the difficult part. As anyone that's run a business at the moment, you go along doing what you do to make money and generate turnover.
Yeah.
When you have a crisis, it's all hands on deck, and all ideas are worth considering about how to handle a crisis, and that's how we've been dealing with it at Foodshare. I should say at the very same time as all this has happened, we were notified by a landlord who, I must say, a very, very generous landlord at that, Jeffrey Thompson, who's a massive uh, grower and packer of fruit. We've had rent-free accommodation from them for the best part of 10 years, and but they're doing a massive expansion on the site where we're located, and that will enable them to process and pack probably more than half the fruit output of the Golden Valley, and so they've said that they can't accommodate us anymore. So,
Oh, wow.
rent-free accommodation for 10 years, which has been the best sort of accommodation you can have. And so, at the same time as all the COVID stuff has arrived, we realised that we no longer have a home. So we I don't mind putting the call out now. Anyone can help us in finding a new home. We'd be most delighted to hear from you. But it's just like most things in life, when you think so many things have gone wrong, nothing else can go wrong, and then two more things go wrong, and that's another example of it. I think things can't get any worse; they do get worse.
Yeah.
We're desperately looking for new accommodation at the moment.
Sorry, Jim, I think I just lost you there for a minute.
I said we're desperately looking for new accommodation at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I do hope that comes about quickly for you guys. And I was just curious, with all the relationships Foodshare as an organization has formed in the town, how was it easy, difficult? Just, yeah, curious about how these relationships are formed with the supermarkets and food growers. Yeah.
Well, we're actually helping each other out. They have a problem. Well, I'll just talk about supermarkets for a start.
Yeah.
They have a problem with what do they do with product that is at the end of its shelf life, and in fact, they're paying a contractor to come and take it to landfill and dumping it in landfill. So not only the food product, but the packaging and everything that was in it was all going to landfill, which seems a bit of a waste. And there's two things to remember in food. There's best before and use by. And use by is usually a definite date. That's the best example might be, say, a litre of milk that's got a use by date on it, and it might be okay for a few days after use by date, but by about the fourth or fifth day after that, it's probably a litre of yogurt rather than milk. And so it's not the product you want to buy or use, and you really can't use things after the use by date. Best before though is just an advisory, and I think most of us know that a packet of biscuits or a soft drink or a lot of other things with best before on them, they might there's probably no difference on the day or the few days after that best before date arrives, and maybe after a bit of time you might notice the biscuits might not be as crunchy or something like that, but they're still good food stuff, and we generally distribute our food stuff within a week, within weeks of getting it. And so we help the supermarkets with the problem by taking that away from them for nothing and then distributing it. So that's how we get it from the supermarket. So that's a win-win situation for everybody. And it's also environmentally friendly because the packaging and food stuff's not going to landfill. The food's being consumed by people. The packaging's probably being put into recycle bins and things like that. So that's a much better option. Most of the fruit and vegetable growers have byproduct in their production chain that's not necessarily suitable for the high standards of supermarkets and other retailers, but there's nothing wrong with the product. So we've also not shown carrots and oversized onions and undersized apples and all those sort of things. They're happy to get rid of them to us because similarly they end up having to dump those things either in landfill or in a composting situation, or they give them away to pig farmers or cattle farmers that stock feed. Most people prefer, if they have to give away product that they can't sell, they prefer to give it away to humans to use rather than to animals to use. So we get a lot of product that way. We also just get a lot of product from the bigger producers, food factories, etc. Just because they think it's a good thing to do. And a great example is SPC, Shepparton Preserving Company, now called Shepparton Partners Collective, but still SPC. They've been a very steady and solid contributor, and they manufacture lots of things like baked beans and spaghetti and tinned fruit and a whole range of products, tomatoes, canned tomatoes, and they've been extraordinarily generous to us over the years, and their product is very shelf stable as well, so it doesn't go off. And it's and we trade with other food shares with that because there's some of those things are the staples that are in every pantry and people know how to make them, so they're greatly appreciated. Campbell's Soups is another one that has a lot of product. The thing is, when people put something into a can, it's generally pretty stable and pretty saleable, but they still make contributions to us because they believe it's the right thing to do. So we do have to thank them greatly for that. That sort of product's really fantastic, and everyone knows how to use it. They know how to open a can and heat something up. Yeah, so that's the nature of it. Another example is look, one of the local pork producers gave us a very large donation of frozen product, and what had happened is his method of operation was that he would go to farmers markets and sell his product, and with COVID most of the farmers markets have been cancelled, and so he ended up freezing a lot of product, and he would take that, normally he would take that product, frozen product, to the farmers market and sell it at 20 or 30 or 40% off, but with he wasn't even able to do that, so he donated what in retail terms would be $20,000 worth of product. Small goods and roasts and things like that, which protein is always hard to get when you're in the food share game. So as an enormous donation by small business and hugely appreciated. So we can help out with things like that when people produce too much, or all of a sudden the market crashes and they can't sell and they have to get rid of things.
Sure.
It's much better that it gets distributed than just dumped it at a rubbish dump somewhere.
That's right. That's so interesting to sort of hear and so consume that information about the actual things that happen behind the scenes at the food share, and really ingrained within the community as well. Jim, I wanted to ask, is there anything that I haven't asked or touched on that you would like to tell people listening to this conversation?
I think one of the questions you asked me to consider in anticipation of this is what would be my vision for a utopian world. Is that right? I'm looking at it here.
Yeah.
And the five main key takeaways. Well, I'm not sure about the five main key takeaways. And uh, as mankind, ever since recorded history, we've been aiming for utopia. The main way we've looked at it is those that in power have maintained a utopian lifestyle for themselves at the expense of everybody else. Uh, I'd like to be an optimist and say, in spite of us all knowing about all of us knowing lots more about a lot of bad things happening in the world, the trend is for people to live better and longer and happier lives than they ever did before, and for more people, and even more people as a percentage of the people in the world, to live better and happier and longer lives. So utopia is what we human beings make it. Uh, I think most people that have considered utopia know that we'll never actually find utopia, and some of the crazy forms of wanting to find it include nationalist socialism or the Nazi ideology, communism, and other things that are meant to bring utopia on Earth and have failed dismally. But I think utopia is where communities come together to do things like food share, where people care about each other and as kind to each other as they can be in the circumstances. And I'm pretty heartened by what's happening in Australia as more wealth disseminates through society, more people seem to be fulfilled by making sure those that are less fortunate than themselves are given an opportunity at a better life. And, you only have to look at what life was like 50 years ago or 100 years ago for most people to know that most people have access to a better life, and we can never give a guarantee of a quality of outcome, but we can give, I think, a guarantee of striving for a quality of opportunity. And uh, Australia is probably a great example where people have come from all over the world. Uh, Pretty much all of them have arrived here with nothing, and within a generation or two generations, they're prospering, and often within the first generation of arrival, prospering. One of the sad things is the original inhabitants of Australia, the Aboriginal people, are still probably the most disadvantaged group that we know of, and that's something for all of us to consider. We didn't acknowledge and understand their culture and their way of surviving in a tough environment. When we arrived, we just thought that they were lesser beings than us, and some thought they weren't even beings. And that's, that is still a work in progress.
Yeah.
But utopia uh, is the best we can make it in the world. Um, and I think it starts with everyone. I don't know what the five key ways to get there are, but the first one I can think of is just try and be kind to people and be decent. And, let your conscience be your guide. I think most people know what the right thing is. And Australia doesn't allow for that in most cases. We spend an awful lot of our time in Australia um, complaining to each other about how bad things are, but no, not too many people want to go and live somewhere else. So I think at least we are able to complain to each other, and anyone will listen about how bad things are, and nothing bad happens to us as a result. So yeah, we're compared to many places, we're already living in utopia in Australia. So that's utopia. So my view on utopia anyway. We're getting there eventually. Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Jim. And I did want to have a final question, which is if people do want to help food Shepparton Foodshare or GV Cares or that sort of merged group, how do they help it in the short term and long term?
Well, the best way is there's a website, Shepparton, well, just Google Shepparton Foodshare and you'll find the Shepparton Foodshare website, and there is a donate button and people can donate money. And look, sadly, money is the quickest and most efficient way to overcome most or many problems, and the issues we have of getting enough food and distributing it most quickly resolved by money. If people did a food drive, that's helpful, but it takes some weeks to accumulate enough food, then you have to get it here, and then it might not be exactly what we need. Whereas if it's money, we can sort of buy what we are short of, because we're getting a lot, we are actually getting quite a few donations of food, and so, but often it's too much of one thing and not enough of another, whereas with money you can flatten it out a bit and get all the right stuff. So there's a website for Shepparton Foodshare. People could donate. There's a donate button on that. That would be wonderful.
Beautiful. That's awesome. And what about the long term, to ensure that Shepparton Foodshare continues to be an important part of the community?
Longer term, we need to find our own premises that we own ourselves. So we're entering now, starting from now, into a campaign. As soon as COVID or the immediate COVID issues die down a little bit, we'll be starting up a fundraising campaign to raise we're probably going to raise the best part of probably $800,000 at least anyway, to buy land and own our own premises. But that way we don't have to rent appropriate premises. We're probably looking at $80,000 to $100,000 a year. At that rate, in 10 years, you could own the premises. So we we're well, I'm announcing it now. We have a fundraising campaign that's starting as we speak to raise funds so we can buy land and build premises or buy a shed that we can use. Now, needs are not great. We just need a large undercover space with which we can operate in and store our product and distribute it from. Probably something like 2,000 square metres of land with about 1,000 square metre shed on it. That's what we need.
Yeah.
If anyone who feels extremely generous and wants to donate such a thing, that would be greatly appreciated. But it's probably wishful thinking. It's more likely a long slog to raise enough money from contributors. That's what we're committed to doing now. Yeah.
Beautiful.
In the longer term, I don't think we'll ever get to the stage in the next little while anyway, 20 or 30 years, that people aren't in some way in need of emergency food relief. So I think we will go on as an organisation for quite a while.
Yeah. Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim, for taking the time to explain your chapter in relation to Foodshare and its deep connection to the community. And for anyone that's watching this conversation or listening to it on podcast, please share it with your friends, your family, whoever resonates with it, and in whatever way we can help the Shepparton community, that would be fantastic. And I'll put the website link with this conversation as soon as I upload it. So thanks, guys. Thank you.